10 Oregon Park Ranger Stories. Story 1, The Watcher in the Timberline, 1991. My second summer as a seasonal ranger. I was 22 years old, fresh out of Oregon State, and convinced I knew everything there was to know about the wilderness. I was assigned to a remote section of the Willamette National Forest, a place so far from civilization that the nearest paved road was 23 miles away. My partner was a guy named Dale Morrison, a 58-year-old veteran who'd been doing this job since before I was born. Dale didn't talk much, and when he did, it was usually to tell me to shut up and pay attention. I thought he was just a grumpy old man. I was wrong. It was late August, and we were doing a routine perimeter check of the eastern boundary. The sun was starting to dip behind the Cascades, painting everything in that orange-gold light that makes the Oregon woods look like something out of a painting. We were about 6 miles from the ranger station when Dale stopped dead in his tracks. "You hear that?" he asked. I listened, nothing but the usual forest sounds, birds, insects, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "I don't hear anything," I said. "Exactly," Dale replied, "that's the problem." He was right, the forest had gone completely silent. No birdsong, no insect buzz, just an eerie, oppressive stillness that felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Then I heard it. A low, rhythmic thumping sound, like something massive beating against the earth. It was coming from somewhere to the east, deep in the timberline where the trees grew so close together you couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. "Stay behind me," Dale whispered, his hand moving to the rifle slung across his back. We crept forward, moving as quietly as two men in heavy boots could move. The thumping grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't random, it had a pattern to it, a rhythm. And then we saw it. Through the gaps in the trees, I caught a glimpse of something massive moving through the forest. It was upright, bipedal, easily 8 or 9 feet tall, with broad shoulders and arms that hung down past its knees. Its body was covered in dark, matted fur that seemed to absorb the fading light rather than reflect it. It was stalking through the trees with a purposefulness that suggested intelligence. Every few steps, it would stop and turn its head, as if listening for something. Dale grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a massive Douglas fir. His face was pale, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "Don't move," he breathed. "Don't make a sound." We stood there for what felt like an eternity, pressed against that tree, barely daring to breathe. The thumping continued, growing fainter as the creature moved deeper into the forest. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. We waited another 20 minutes before Dale finally relaxed his grip on my arm. He didn't say anything as we made our way back to the station. He didn't say anything that night either, but I saw him cleaning his rifle before bed, something I'd never seen him do before. The next morning, I asked him what we'd seen. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. Then he said, "Nothing, you saw nothing, and if anyone asks, that's what you tell them." I never saw Dale look at me the same way again after that night, and I never asked him about it again either. But I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't a bear. Story 2, The Crying Child, 1994. By 1994, I'd been promoted to full-time ranger. I was stationed at a small outpost near the Three Sisters Wilderness, a beautiful but treacherous area that attracted hikers from all over the world. It was October, late in the season, and most of the tourists had gone home. The days were getting shorter, the nights colder, and the forest was settling into that quiet, contemplative state that precedes winter. I was doing a solo patrol of the western perimeter, a route I'd walked 100 times before. The trail was familiar, comforting even. I knew every rock, every tree, every turn. That's why what happened next was so unsettling. I was about 4 miles from the station when I heard it, a child crying. Not the fussy cry of a toddler throwing a tantrum, but the deep, gut-wrenching sobs of a child in genuine distress. I froze, my heart racing. The sound was coming from somewhere off the trail, deep in the trees to my left. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" The crying stopped. I waited, listening, nothing but the wind rustling through the leaves. I called out again, louder this time. "Hello, this is a park ranger. If you're lost, I can help you." Silence. I was about to dismiss it as my imagination when the crying started again. closer this time, almost directly to my left. It was the unmistakable sound of a young child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, sobbing uncontrollably. I pushed through the underbrush, following the sound. The trees grew thicker, the light dimmer, and the air took on a chill that had nothing to do with the October cold. The crying led me to a small clearing. In the center stood a single pine tree, its branches drooping low to the ground, and beneath those branches I saw a small figure, a child, huddled in a ball, their face buried in their knees. "Hey there," I said, keeping my voice soft and calm. "It's okay, I'm here to help you." The child looked up, and I felt the blood drain from my face. The child's face was wrong, not deformed or injured, but wrong in a way that defied description. The features were too sharp, too angular, as if someone had tried to sculpt a human face from memory, but had gotten the proportions slightly off. The eyes were too large, too dark, and they seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The child smiled, a smile that was too wide, with too many teeth. "You can't help me," the child said, in a voice that wasn't quite a child's voice. "Nobody can help me." And then, without any warning, the child vanished. Not ran away, not disappeared behind a tree, vanished like a candle being snuffed out. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The forest was silent again, the oppressive silence that I'd come to recognize as a warning sign. I didn't wait to investigate further. I turned and ran back to the ranger station, not stopping until I was safely inside with the door locked behind me. I told my supervisor about what I'd seen. He listened without interrupting, his face carefully neutral. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said, "You didn't see anything. Do you understand me? You saw nothing." I understood then what he was telling me. This wasn't the first time someone had reported seeing that child, and it wouldn't be the last. I never patrolled that section of the forest alone again. Story 3, The Light That Followed, 1997. I'd been a ranger for 10 years by 1997, and I thought I'd seen it all. I'd dealt with aggressive bears, lost hikers, even a couple of bodies over the years, but nothing prepared me for what happened that September. I was at the ranger station late one night, finishing up some paperwork, when I noticed a strange light coming from the window. It wasn't the steady glow of a campfire or the intermittent flash of a flashlight. It was a soft, pulsing light, almost like a heartbeat, that seemed to be coming from somewhere in the forest about a quarter-mile away. I grabbed my binoculars and went outside. The night was clear, the sky thick with stars, and the forest was bathed in the silver glow of a nearly full moon. The light was still there, pulsing gently, moving slowly through the trees. It was about the size of a beach ball and hovered about 10 feet off the ground, moving with a fluid grace that defied any explanation I could come up with. I watched it for nearly an hour, transfixed. It moved in a slow, meandering path through the forest, never straying more than a few hundred yards from the station. Sometimes it would stop and hover in place, pulsing more rapidly, as if it was examining something. Then it would continue on its way. At one point it seemed to notice me. It stopped moving and hovered in place, its pulsing quickening. I felt a wave of something wash over me, not quite fear, not quite curiosity, but something in between. It felt like being examined, like I was a specimen under a microscope. Then, without any warning, the light shot upward into the sky, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. It disappeared into the clouds within seconds, leaving me standing there in the dark, my mouth hanging open. I reported the incident to my supervisor the next morning. He listened, nodded, and said, "Probably a weather balloon." At midnight, I asked, hovering 10 feet off the ground. "Probably a weather balloon," he repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. I didn't argue, but I knew what I'd seen, and it wasn't a weather balloon. Story 4, The Abandoned Camp, 2001. The turn of the millennium brought new challenges to the Oregon woods. More people were venturing into the backcountry than ever before, and with them came more incidents, lost hikers, injuries, the occasional death. But some incidents were stranger than others. In the summer of 2001, I was called to investigate an abandoned campsite near the Mackenzie River. A group of hikers had reported finding the site completely deserted, with all the gear still in place, tents, sleeping bags, cooking equipment, even food that was still fresh. When I arrived, I understood why they'd been so unsettled. The campsite was immaculate, everything was exactly where it should be. The tents were still standing, their flaps open as if the occupants had just stepped out for a moment. A pot of coffee sat on the extinguished campfire, still warm to the touch. 3 plates, 3 mugs, 3 sets of silverware were arranged neatly on a picnic table. But there were no people, no sign of struggle, no indication of where the campers had gone. They had simply vanished, leaving everything behind. I searched the area thoroughly, looking for any clue as to what had happened. The ground was soft, muddy from recent rain, and I could clearly see the footprints of 3 people leading away from the campsite. I followed them for about 100 yards, through the trees and across a small stream. And then they stopped. Just stopped, no footprints leading away, no signs of a struggle, no indication of where they'd gone. Just 3 sets of footprints that ended in the middle of the forest, as if the people who made them had simply vanished into thin air. I reported the incident to the local authorities, and a search was conducted. They never found the campers. The official report listed them as missing, presumed dead, but there was no evidence of foul play, no bodies, nothing. I still think about that campsite sometimes. I think about the coffee that was still warm, the plates that were still set, the 3 sets of footprints that led nowhere, and I wonder what happened to those people. I don't think I'll ever know. Story 5, The Face in the Tree, 2004. This is the one that still gives me nightmares. It was late November, and I was doing a routine patrol of a remote section of the forest that was popular with hunters. The season was winding down, and most of the hunters had packed up and gone home. I was about 2 miles from the nearest road when I saw it, a face carved into the trunk of a massive old-growth Douglas fir. I stopped staring at it. The face was roughly the size of a human head, with deep-set eyes, a prominent nose, and a mouth that was frozen in an expression of silent scream. It looked ancient, the wood weathered and cracked, as if it had been there for decades, maybe centuries. I approached cautiously, my hand resting on the pepper spray at my belt. The face was incredibly detailed, far more intricate than any carving I'd ever seen. The eyes seemed to follow me as I moved, and I had to remind myself that it was just wood, just a carving, nothing more. But as I got closer, I noticed something strange. The wood around the face wasn't weathered like the rest of the tree. It was smooth, almost polished, as if someone had been touching it regularly. I reached out to touch it, and the face blinked. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, my hand flying to my radio. The face, no, the thing in the tree, had definitely blinked. Its eyes had closed and opened, slowly, deliberately, like a person waking from a long sleep. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, not stopping until I reached my truck. I never went back to that section of the forest, and I never told anyone what I'd seen, not even my wife. Some things are too strange to share, too unbelievable to be believed. But I know what I saw, and I know that there are things in those woods that don't follow the rules we think we understand. Story 6, The Hunters Who Came Back Wrong, 2007. Sometimes the horror isn't in what you find, sometimes it's in what finds you. In October of 2007, 2 hunters, brothers named Mark and David Ellison, went into the forest for a 3-day hunting trip. They were experienced outdoorsmen, familiar with the area, and they'd made the same trip dozens of times before. They never came back. A search party was organized, and after 3 days of searching, we found them. They were sitting in their campsite, exactly where they were supposed to be, surrounded by all their gear. They looked normal enough, a little disheveled, a little thin, but otherwise unharmed. But something was wrong. When we approached them, they didn't react. They just sat there, staring straight ahead, their eyes unfocused and glassy. They didn't respond to their names, didn't acknowledge our presence, didn't seem to be aware of anything around them. We airlifted them to the nearest hospital, where doctors ran every test they could think of. Physically, the brothers were fine, dehydrated and malnourished, but otherwise healthy. But mentally, something had changed. They never spoke again, not a single word. They spent the rest of their lives in a care facility, staring blankly at the walls, their minds apparently gone somewhere we couldn't follow. The official explanation was that they'd suffered some kind of shared psychotic episode, perhaps triggered by dehydration or exposure to some kind of toxin, but I knew better. I'd seen the look in their eyes. It wasn't the look of madness or confusion. It was the look of someone who'd seen something so terrible that their mind had simply shut down to protect itself. I don't know what they saw in those woods, but whatever it was enough to break two strong, experienced men, and that's something I'll never forget. Story 7, The Humming, 2010. I'd been hearing stories about the humming for years. Other rangers had mentioned it, a low, droning sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, usually at night, usually in the deepest parts of the forest. I'd never heard it myself, not until 2010. I was on a solo overnight patrol, camping at a remote site about 15 miles from the nearest road. The night was clear and cold, and I was sitting by my campfire, enjoying the peace and solitude when I heard it. A low, droning hum, barely audible at first, but growing steadily louder. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard, and it didn't sound mechanical either. It sounded almost organic, like the forest itself was humming. I stood up, my rifle in my hands, scanning the darkness. The hum grew louder, and with it came a strange vibration that I could feel in my chest, in my teeth, in the very bones of my skull. And then I saw them. Lights, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, moving through the forest around me. They were small, no bigger than fireflies, but they glowed with an intensity that seemed almost radioactive. They moved in patterns, weaving through the trees in complex formations that looked almost like writing. The hum reached a crescendo, and for a moment I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I felt connected somehow to the forest, to the lights, to everything. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The lights vanished, the hum faded, and I was left standing alone in the darkness, my rifle hanging uselessly at my side. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, watching the darkness, waiting for something that never came. I've never told anyone about that night, not because I'm afraid they won't believe me, but because I'm afraid they will. Story 8, The Man Without a Shadow, 2013. I'd been a ranger for 26 years by 2013. I'd seen a lot of strange things, things I couldn't explain, things I'd learned not to talk about, but nothing prepared me for what I saw that September afternoon. I was at the ranger station, enjoying a rare quiet moment, when I noticed a man approaching from the parking lot. He was tall and thin, dressed in hiking gear, and he walked with a steady, purposeful stride. But something was wrong. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. He looked normal enough, clean-shaven, neatly dressed, the kind of hiker who knew what he was doing, but there was something about him that made my skin crawl. And then I realized what it was. He didn't have a shadow. It was a bright, sunny day, the kind of day when shadows are sharp and distinct. Every other person in the parking lot had a shadow, dark and clear against the pavement, but this man had nothing. Where his shadow should have been, there was just nothing. He walked up to the station and knocked on the door. I opened it, my heart pounding, and asked if I could help him. "I'm looking for my son," he said. "He went missing in these woods about 20 years ago. I was told you might be able to help me." His voice was normal, his demeanor calm and polite, but there was something in his eyes that unsettled me, a flatness, an emptiness, like looking into a deep well. I asked him his son's name, and he told me. I checked the records and found that a young man with that name had indeed gone missing in the area nearly 2 decades ago. His body was never found. "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't think there's anything I can do to help you." The man nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "Thank you for your time." He turned and walked away, back toward the parking lot. I watched him go, and as he walked I noticed something else strange. His feet didn't quite touch the ground. They hovered just above the pavement, as if he was walking on air. He reached his car, a beat-up old sedan that looked like it had been parked there for years, got in, and drove away. I never saw him again. I've thought about that man a lot over the years. I've wondered who he was, what he was, and whether he ever found what he was looking for. I don't think I'll ever know. Story 9, The Cabin That Wasn't There, 2016. I'd been in the Oregon woods long enough to know every trail, every landmark, every building. I knew where the ranger stations were, where the fire lookouts were, and where the old cabins, some abandoned for decades, still stood. That's why I knew, without a doubt, that there was no cabin at the end of the old logging road. But there it was. I was doing a routine patrol of an area that hadn't seen much traffic in years. The road was overgrown, barely passable, and I was about to turn back when I saw it, a small cabin, nestled in a clearing at the end of the road. It was a simple structure, built of rough-hewn logs, with a stone chimney and a porch that sagged under its own weight. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and I could see a light flickering in the window. I approached cautiously, my hand on my sidearm. Nobody was supposed to be out here. This area was closed to the public, and the nearest legal camping site was miles away. I knocked on the door, no answer. I knocked again, harder this time. The door swung open. Inside, the cabin was warm and cozy, with a crackling fire in the fireplace, a pot of something simmering on the stove, and a bed in the corner covered with a patchwork quilt. Everything looked lived in, comfortable, ordinary. But there was nobody there. I stepped inside, calling out, "Hello, is anyone here?" My voice echoed off the walls, unanswered. I looked around the cabin, taking in the details. There were photographs on the mantel, sepia-toned images of people in old-fashioned clothing, their faces frozen in time. There was a book on the table, its pages yellowed with age, open to a page that seemed to be written in a language I didn't recognize. I was about to leave when I noticed something strange. The fire in the fireplace wasn't real. It was a painting, or a projection, or something else entirely, flickering flames that gave off no heat, that didn't consume the logs they appeared to burn. And then I realized that everything in the cabin was like that. The pot on the stove, the bed in the corner, the photographs on the mantel, none of it was real. It was all an illusion, a carefully constructed facsimile of a cabin that didn't exist. I backed out of the cabin, my heart racing, and as I stepped off the porch, I looked back. The cabin was gone. There was nothing there but an empty clearing, overgrown with weeds, with no sign that anything had ever been built there. I don't know what I saw that day. I don't know if it was a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely, but I know that I've never been back to that logging road, and I never will. Story 10, The Last Patrol, 2019. My last year as a ranger, 32 years in the Oregon woods, and I was finally hanging up my hat. I was tired, worn down, and ready for a quiet retirement. But the forest wasn't ready to let me go. It was my final patrol, a symbolic walk through the section of the forest that had been my responsibility for more than 3 decades. I wanted to say goodbye to the trees, the trails, the places that had been my home for so long. I walked for hours, visiting all my favorite spots. The ridge where I'd watched the sunrise, the creek where I'd cooled my feet on hot summer days, the meadow where I'd seen deer grazing in the early morning mist. And then, as the sun began to set, I found myself at the edge of a clearing I didn't recognize. I'd been through this area 100 times. There was no clearing here. There never had been. But there it was, a perfect circle of open ground, surrounded by towering pines. In the center stood a single tree, an ancient, gnarled oak that seemed out of place among the evergreens. I approached the tree, drawn by something I couldn't explain. As I got closer, I saw that there was something carved into the trunk, a symbol or a message or something else entirely. It was the same symbol I'd seen in the cabin that wasn't there, 3 years earlier. And then I heard it, a voice, soft and gentle, coming from somewhere behind me. "Thank you, Ranger, for all your years of service. The forest is grateful." I turned around, but there was nobody there. Just the trees, the shadows, and the fading light of the setting sun. I left the clearing and walked back to my truck. I never went back to that spot again. But sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about that voice. I think about what it said and what it meant. And I wonder if the forest really is grateful, or if it's just waiting for me to come back.